Let's get blunt about your financial affairs. Welcome to Tea at Taxevity, where you get insights from insiders, our many clients and friends. I'm Pramod Sharma, your actuary at Taxevity. I help people with life insurance, disability insurance, and pensions. Our guest today is Mark Goodfield. Mark, what do you do when you're not being interviewed?
Well, I'm a partner with BDO Canada, which is a national accounting firm.
Oh, okay, that's a very concise answer. Thank you. You're also the author of a book, and the book is the topic of our interview today. So I was there at your book launch, and it was a pretty interesting affair because we got food and all sorts of nice treats. What prompted you to write this book?
Two things. Number one, to be honest, it was on my bucket list. It was one of my items I'd like to do. And number two, as you know, I write a blog, The Blunt Bean Counter, and as I look back over my 5 years of writing it, I had accumulated a lot of articles, and I went through it and thought about it, and there was a lot of topics that I had written about several times, and I thought, well, maybe I should just put these together in a book and organize them, and I thought that it would help my readers or whoever would want to buy the book.
And what do you consider the ultimate taboo topic?
Death. No doubt about it, death.
And what is it about death that holds people back from planning and thinking about it?
People don't want to accept their mortality. It's as simple as that. You know, as soon as you talk to people about, you know, updating wills or planning for their death, they recoil. You know, I talk to clients or people I meet and say, okay, let's get this done, and they say, yeah, and then I meet them again 6 months later, the next year, it's not done. It's just, you know, people just do not want to accept the fact that they're going to die, and therefore they don't want to plan for it, and that creates lots of negative consequences.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I feel the exact same issues because I deal with life and health insurance, and people need it. You can see that they do, but at the same time, well, we'll put it off, and they just keep putting it off.
And unfortunately, you know, when you put it off, life sometimes, unfortunately, interrupts in a negative way, and you know, the fact that you put it off creates tremendous stress and discomfort for the surviving people.
How old were you when your father passed away?
I was 28.
And did he have his financial affairs in order?
He did. Well, he was an accountant like I, and so he actually was fairly organized. The problem is, as we sort of discussed, is that he had a will created when he was young and had, you know, no money, no assets, and he was in the process of updating his will to have, you know, reflect the current circumstances. And I can't recall exactly, I think there was going to be some trust for the children and different things. And my mom and him started working on it, and between procrastination and life and getting to it, it sat on their dresser in their bedroom, and unfortunately he died suddenly, and that will was null and void because it was never signed, and we had to revert back to the will they had signed when they were 22 and had no assets.
Yeah, I know that in my own case, we have not updated our will in a number of years, and we really need to get around to it. But again, it's one of those things that's still on that list of things to do. Do you consider the will the first place to start when you're thinking about death?
The will in conjunction probably with making a list of all the assets you own. So I think you have to make sure you've considered everything you have. So I suggest you sit down and make a comprehensive list of everything you own, from real estate to stocks, and also even like insurance policies you have, because that will factor into your planning for your will. So make a list of everything you have, and then you can start putting together your will.
Okay, and then where would you make that list?
Over the years, I found that people, you know, write it on an Excel spreadsheet, they have jot notes. So I personally, for my clients, have created what I call an estate organizer, which has a detailed listing of everything. And I think if you looked on the internet, you could probably find similar types of documents. But the nice thing about that is that, you know, you can create a fillable document that can change every year with the small things, so you don't have to rewrite it. If anybody actually wants a copy from me, they can just go to my, you know, blog. The Blunt Bean Counter has a contact section. Just send me an email and I'll send you a copy of it.
Okay, that's one of the things I'll be doing after this interview. How often should a will be updated?
It's not a set answer. I suggest it's basically on significant events, be it family events, financial events, or even this year, there's significant tax changes to estates. So if you have a blended family, or you had set up spousal trusts, or if you have a trust for a disabled child, the rules have changed substantially. So that would be an impetus to actually go back to your lawyer and see if any of those changes will cause your will to be changed.
Okay, and this year being 2015.
Yeah. Well, the rules will take place in 2016, but yeah.
Okay. And how do you go about selecting an executor for your will?
That's a good question. So, okay, typically people want family members because it's their money and they want their family involved, and typically their family are the beneficiaries.
And you don't want to be paying outside third parties to administer things.
Correct. The problem with that is you have family dynamics, and your children don't necessarily have the characteristics. I would suggest you want an executor, which is typically financial acumen and the ability not to stress, because as somebody who's been an executor and also dealt with lots of people who are executors, several of them just cannot handle the process, and it bogs the whole thing down. So going a bit of circle, years ago, as you said, I would typically never think of having a corporate executor such as, the banks, because the fees are fairly substantial, and if you have a family member, you don't have to pay those. But I sometimes am beginning to think that, they're not necessarily the worst thing, because it takes away the family dynamic issue where siblings start fighting over issues in the wills, and they're totally independent, and they have no reason or past issues to deal with. So I think it comes down to, if you're going to have a family member, make sure the family dynamics of the children would hopefully work if you name one or two of them, and ensure at least one of them has some financial acumen.
Okay. Would you suggest that you tell the executor that you've selected them?
Yeah, that's for sure. Again, I don't know if this is a mortality thing, but a surprising number of people don't even tell their executor that they're going to be the executor. I've, as an accountant, I get estates to deal with, and I meet the executor, and they say, "Wow, they tell me I've just been named executor. I didn't even know I was executor," and I'm shocked that some people don't even tell their executor. So yes, if you're going to name somebody an executor, I think you should tell them. I also think you should provide a summary, as we said, an estate organizer, some list of assets for them. Now, you don't have to necessarily give them the assets up front, because you may not want that from a confidentiality point of view or privacy point of view. But let's say you're going to have in your safety deposit box, say, okay, you're my executor. I have this list that will make your job easier. It's in my safety deposit box. Speak to my lawyer or my spouse when I pass away.
Okay, that makes sense. So it's good to tell your executor that you've selected them as your executor. What about the people who are going to be beneficiaries in your will? Is it a good idea to tell them in advance?
That depends on each individual. Personally, I think it's a really good idea to discuss your will. I have clients that have told all their children exactly what they're getting, what they have. I have other clients that wouldn't consider doing that in a million years. They want privacy. They don't want their kids to be waiting for them to die, per se, although I think in most cases that's not the truth. So I sort of think that you at least got to do the middle sort of ground. So, for example, you don't necessarily have to tell everybody they're getting X amount of dollars or this asset, but there are assets in a family. Let's take a cottage, for example. Parents often think, well, young Johnny loves going to the cottage, and I'm leaving him the cottage because it's his favorite thing and he wants to go up every weekend. But if you actually took the time to sit down with your family and you spoke to all your children, Johnny may say, yeah, I love coming to the cottage, but that's because you guys do all the work and I get to have fun and eat and do nothing. But A, I don't want to pay for it, or I don't want to pay for the upkeep. And B, I like just being a guest. I don't actually want to own it. So, you're making assumptions that may not be true. Let's say you have different art. Certain children may want certain pieces of art. Why not find that out? There's lots of things like that where you can discuss in general. I'm also a proponent where if you have enough money, I don't see the point in taking it to the grave. I think you should distribute some gifts while your children are young enough to enjoy it, and you can vicariously enjoy that. So that's another thing maybe you consider and discuss with them is, you're not going to take any risk with your own retirement, but if you're in a situation where you're going to have enough money for sure to retire, why not give some small gifts? Or even my in-laws have taken us on family vacations, which is the grandchildren have bonded greatly, and it's been an unbelievable experience, sort of priceless experience, so to speak. And so there's different things like that you can do.
When you're giving gifts to your family, say, what's the tax?
So if you're giving cash to somebody over 18 years old that's not your spouse, there's actually no tax. The tax issue becomes when you give capital property such as stocks or real estate. You're actually deemed to dispose of those assets when you give them to your children per se. And so let's say you had owned a rental property that you bought for $300,000, it's now worth $1 million. If you gift it or change, there's a bunch of legal concepts, but let's say you actually truly legally in tax, for tax perspective, have actually transferred that property legally and tax-wise to the child. You would have a deemed disposition of the difference of the fair market value at the time you transferred that assets versus the adjusted cost base. So if it's worth $1 million and it cost you $300,000, there's a $700,000 capital gain. So it's a huge issue. You have to be really careful with transferring something that is capital property. But actual cash to anybody over 18 other than your spouse, there's no income tax consequences.
Okay, so cash looks like a good thing to give right away. But items that have capital gains, is it perhaps better to give that at the time of the estate and maybe use life insurance to help pre-fund some of the tax?
Yeah, typically that would make sense. I mean, you could have capital losses on a personal basis that could absorb that. And the life insurance is important if you want to leave a legacy that you may not have enough, you're concerned you'll have enough to leave to your children. You may want to potentially have life insurance to leave them a gift of a certain amount. The life insurance is also good to potentially pay the tax liability you have. Or if you have let's go back to our cottage example, you don't gift the cottage and you're going to have a huge capital gain, you can use the insurance to sort of cover the cottage costs so that the cottage could stay in the family if you want to use it.
What are your thoughts on financial planning and financial plans? Let's be blunt.
A financial planner once told me the only thing a financial plan proves is that ink sticks to paper. But I'm not quite that skeptical because financial plans are based on so many assumptions that they do change and they could be out of date. But I think they provide a baseline that's important. And yes, things may change, but at least it gives you a starting point. And I think that's really important for retirement planning, especially to have that baseline that you could always refer back to. And yes, they may change, and inflation may go up, or interest rates may go down, and you may lose your job. But you can use that plan to adjust. So I think they definitely are a good, at least, baseline.
Yeah, I think the process is good. It makes you think about things that might otherwise have been overlooked. How often would you have a financial plan updated? Again, there's probably no black and white answer.
Yeah, I think if there's significant financial changes, for example, you may have done a financial plan, 8 years ago, and sort of the financial crisis hit, and all the assumptions are based on, 5 or 6, 7%, returns, and right now, with the markets being sort of flat and interest rates being so low, all the assumptions are way out of whack. I've looked at plans where, it's assumed that you're saving X amount of dollars, and the reality when I look at them is people are spending far more. The problem with financial plans is they're premised on how much you spend currently and plan to spend, and I find that most people are way out of whack in what they think they really spend. When I sit down and force somebody to actually track what they spend, they're always amazed that they spend way more than they think. So a lot of times when you look at these things and the practicalities of a few years later, they spent way more money than they anticipated, so they're out of whack just on spending.
Do you come across clients who are worried about running out of money during retirement?
Oh, always, yes.
And what kind of advice do you give them?
Again, I think you need to start with a financial plan because that's a good baseline. In my book, I have a 6-part series on, the chapter heading is how much you need to retire, and it then says, heck, if I know or anybody else does. And I think that's the truth because People try to find this magic number that's out there, and there isn't. No one really knows how much it is. But if you start with a baseline financial plan, and in the book I talk about the sort of rule of thumb 4% rule, which is basically if you have a portfolio of equal mix of fixed income and stocks. This researcher William Bengen proved that, or at least said that if you have this mixed portfolio, your retirement, if you take out 4% plus inflation, should last you your nest egg should last you 30 to 35 years. And so, that's a good sort of start to take a look at how that number would work out. In my book, I talk about various modern studies that criticize that scenario. Some say it should be 3%, 2%. Others say, yeah, it could be 4%, but you have to build in a whole bunch of different things. But I don't care what you think it should be. At least have a starting point. And if it's 4% or 3%, or if you start with 4%, you think you want to be conservative, go to 3%. At least you have something to start with and a plan of where you're going. The thing is, don't put your head in the sand, which I think a lot of people do. And even surprisingly, a lot of clients or people I've met that have substantial money, and they buy big houses and great cottages, but everything's premised on the cash flow that they make now from their business or their professional practice. And when they actually consider, or when I make them consider what their spending habits are, because they've they've grown to their income levels, I say, what happens when you stop that flow? And it's really hard for them to continue at that pace. So, they may have to sell a cottage they didn't want to plan on selling, or things like that. So I think the long and short of it is, don't stick your head in the sand. Actually do a plan, whatever your planner or you think is a fair withdrawal rate, whether it's 4%, 3%, 2.5%, I don't care. Start with something and at least have a plan.
Mm-hmm. What's your key message for the people watching?
Put your finances in order. Accept the fact that you're going to die at some point in time, so make sure everything's in place. It's very selfish not to put all this in place. For those of the people that don't, 54% of Canadians don't have a will, which is, I think, an unbelievable statistic. But let's say you do have a will, but you haven't put a list of all your assets together, and no one knows what you have and where everything is. You have no insurance. That might have been helpful. You are creating a massive financial mess for your grieving spouse and family at a time they're ill-prepared to deal with it. And even many of them have no ability to deal with it even if they weren't grieving. So I think it's a very unselfish act, basically, to just take your time and put all this in place.
Mm-hmm. And where can people get a copy of your book?
You can buy it on Amazon. It's actually easier to get it somehow on the Amazon US site as opposed to Canada, which I conceptually don't understand why, but Amazon US doesn't necessarily connect too well with Amazon Canada. But anyways, somewhere on Amazon.
Okay, and what's the best way for people to reach you?
Probably if they will go to the Blunt Bean Counter blog, there's a contact section on that.
Thanks very much for dropping by.
Well, thanks for having me.